The Boten and Three Deities arcs serve as two final building blocks towards Tokyo Revenger's long-awaited finale. These two arcs are a bit confusing to say the least, as my first impressions were just that, confused. I had no idea how to directly process what these arcs were trying to accomplish in the grand scheme of the story, but as I've reread them, I started to understand a bit more, and this analysis is a product of that. It's because of these arcs' relatively short lengths, I wanted to combine them into one video for you all, so let's get into these two last steps towards the big finish. This is Tokyo Revenger's Boten and Three Deities arcs. Turning back time for one friend. The opening page of chapter 187 titled Way to Go has each character positioned to depict their current status in the story. Kisaki is off to the side behind Emma and Takemichi as his reign has come to pass. Izana walks away with a smile, pleased to some extent with how his life ended. Emma faces forward, walking with everyone because her death is what incites this loop's failure. Then there's Mikey, who looks up to see darkness regardless of the sun's rays. Hina stands there looking forward while her body faces backwards as she is reminded of the past. Lastly is Takemichi, who looks towards Hina while moving forward. It's fitting for him because he's finally crossed his final hurdle in saving her life, while ignoring Mikey's darkened expression even in sunlight. It's a perfect image to centralize the focus of what these upcoming arcs are supposed to center around, and all of it begins with Takemichi resolving to go back to the future for good. However, at the center of it is his conflict over Kisaki's final words to him. Both of them gave their everything for Hina in different ways. They are parallels to one another because love twisted them to do the impossible. Kisaki, regardless of any time leaps, managed to make his plans work out. Takemichi recognizes this and is reasonably shaken up by it, which is why he wanted to meet Kisaki as equals more often. It's a natural progression of his character development because he's starting to see what pieces of him were in his opposition. A steep contrast to Mikey, who disbands Toman after finding out what lies ahead in the future. Learning all Takemichi has sacrificed to make a bright future for Hina, Mikey does what makes most sense for him. The Toman he fought for, the Toman he made, turned into one of his closest friends' greatest enemies. After losing his sister and so many other family members and friends, Mikey is completely lost without anyone to support him or save him in the way he needed to be rescued. Just as Takemichi had come to an epiphany for what he could do for others, Mikey came to the same conclusion. If one of them was a blessing, the other was the curse. Kisaki wanted to use Mikey for his strength. Shinichiro died indirectly because of him. Kazutora blamed him for going to jail, and Baji died because of Kazutora. Izana, Emma, and most of all Takemichi were all negatively affected because of his involvement and his life. It didn't matter whether or not he was at fault. Living is what caused them all pain. So he had no choice except to fall deeper and deeper into the black until he crossed the line of no return. But that's stepping a bit too far because Takemichi has just returned to the future where everyone he fought so hard for survived in the afterglow of Mikey's fall. A drastic contrast to the previous future, which ended with everyone dying anyways. This change to events in the future makes Mikey's fate directly in Takemichi's hands no matter what happens. Obviously this was always the case, but now it takes precedence over everyone else's fate to an extent. Stopping this near endless cycle begins and ends with saving Mikey, which was pretty much the setup from the beginning. Toman grew so powerful because Mikey was a tool in every timeline to make it so. He's been the central force for Toman turning evil because he was used by someone or loses out to his own pain. Yes, saving Hina was one of Tokyo Revenger's driving goals, however, saving everyone who needed it is what Takemichi promised all the way back in chapter 8. Takemichi's desire to get his perfect fairy tale ending is seemingly impossible though because Naoto no longer wishes to change this future and thus cannot serve as a proper trigger for any more time leaps. Takemichi is alone in trying to solve the issue at its roots so everyone can be happy. Draken's message from the time capsule portrays this isolation perfectly. He's the only one who cries because he cares so much about each and every critical moment of sorrow each and every one of his friends feels. Sure, it's grating, but it's a central part of his character. A future where everyone he cares for isn't happy isn't a future worth living in. At the core of this interaction is the message of life not being a movie. There isn't always a happy fairy tale ending for every person living their life. So it's not too unreasonable to think that this is where the story could have possibly ended and that Takemichi would have been prepared to move on completely with his life until he saw Mikey's videotape. This videotape is a make or break story moment for Tokyo Revengers, and I don't mean to be dramatic or cliche when I say that. Choosing to throw away his perfect future with Hina and all of his friends being alive can feel like a betrayal of all we as readers have read of Takemichi's journey. Yes, Takemichi has always been greedy, always wanting more, never settling for the bare minimum. Mikey is lost, and like I said, he does deserve to be saved because he's been destroyed in every timeline's outcome. However, his dark impulse tries to explain his emotional outbursts and temporary moments of insanity after losing someone important to him or undergoing some serious traumatic events. Trying to write this into the story after everything we've gone through to explain Mikey's clear mental illness is asinine and just lazy. Mikey is a child who's undergone unimaginable trauma and has never been all there, like ever in the story. If the dark impulse had been described as dark thoughts he has in his mind, it would have been more or less okay, but what this impulse does later in the story is absolutely ludicrous to Mikey's character. All I can say is this reveal in Mikey's video being what spurs Takemichi to time leap one last time isn't the strongest motivator from a reader's perspective and shouldn't be one from Takemichi's perspective. He's destroying every one of his friends' futures and leaving the woman he loves and who loves him back for someone else's sake. Although it is an admirable thing to do for someone you care for and in line with Takemichi's character, after fighting so hard to save Hina for so long only to throw it all away can feel, again, like a betrayal of the reader's time put into this story. At the end of this arc, there's a couple of flashbacks for Mucho and Hanma. These two flashbacks give some history for the characters, but it kind of begs the question of why now? Why do Mucho and Hanma's stories matter now? Boten was all about Takemichi and Mikey's decisions when creating the future that's been rewritten. Hanma and Mucho don't connect to those themes of loss or perpetual suffering both of these characters had endured and or overcome to reach their perceived peace within this arc. Both of these flashbacks just feel very haphazardly placed within the context of the plot, which is an awkward way to lead into the Five Deities arc as Takemichi is immediately thrown into everyone's crosshairs trying to recruit him. There's an obvious speed run to introduce this arc's top players, and using old legends of the delinquent world like Takemichi and Draken to force a conflict makes their influence on it pretty big. Unfortunately, the two newly introduced characters of Toronto and Senju don't really matter all that much, so let's start with the most insignificant and forgettable. Toronto is, and there is no other way to explain him, a lazy copy of Taiju, an oversized monster who disrespects people and beats up Inupi. Senju is the only girl around who seems capable of scrapping with the big dogs and lands a few strong looking kicks until she's beaten around by Toronto. I think I'm starting to remember a whole nother arc's dynamic already. She also has literal 20-plus-year-old fighters on her team. This is supposed to represent how dangerous things are getting as literal adults are joining the fight, but all I can think of saying is get a job and stop fighting kids in the street. I'm not even joking, seriously. Benkei and Waka are both almost 30 in 2008. Then there's Mikey. He single-handedly breaks the tension of the Three Deities arc title in half. But before that, it's best to address some other developments that happened before he decides to break everything that the title is supposed to mean for this arc. There's small development for Senju, and we find out that she has a connection to Sanzu and that she's actually his younger sister. And then there's a setup for Takemichi to somehow gain future vision, which is a can of worms that'll be used to save his ass later on. And aside from that, nothing else really happens except for Draken's untimely death. This decision is just, there is no other way to say it except that it is a net negative for this story as it approaches its final arc. Draken still wanted to save Mikey, and that is in line with his character as he says that Emma speaks to him in dreams telling him to do so. He's perpetually tortured by not being able to save either of them. It gets worse when you consider this reveal is technically still a part of what happens going into the future Takemichi just left, so Draken is presumably still suffering from these dreams. All of this overlaps with Mikey wanting to protect Takemichi's dream for everyone to be happy. He fights some of the strongest members in Tomen, some of his closest friends, without a single scratch or attack being landed on him. Furthermore, his impulse turns him into a walking, talking, fighting machine who is effectively unstoppable. He doesn't discriminate, He'll hit friend or foe, all the while being untouchable. It's a complete detachment of the sensitive person Mikey is supposed to be, and contradicts his motivation as he nearly kills the guy he was supposed to be protecting in the first place. He also shows little to no grief over Draken's passing before he destroys any thought of the Three Deities arc meaning a single damn thing. He destroys South easily, who easily destroys Senju, and thus Mikey reigns supreme. There's a comparison between his assault on Kazutora and now, which isn't even a decent comparison because of the big bad word context. Mikey's willingness to kill Kazutora was out of revenge. It was an extreme emotional response from a teenager who lost two very important people to the same exact person. In this context, it made perfect sense that he would just lose his mind. Takemichi bringing up this comparison is not that at all. Draken was done in by a random thug. Toronto is a random person with zero connection to anyone we've ever seen before. It is nothing except a plot device darkness because trauma doesn't justify Mikey's actions anymore. Not that putting several of his friends 6 feet under made any sense either in any of the previous timelines. Sitting on this as the arc's conclusion felt empty and begs the question, what was the point? Draken gets knocked off for no reason. He's discarded from the final battle and can't even move on properly because really he died a failure. He's watched his closest friend twist and contort into a monster in numerous timelines and he can't even save him in the end. Draken is one of the most tragic and sad characters in Tokyo Revengers. He's a great guy who loves the people he cares for, stands up for them, and won't ever back down from any challenge no matter who or what he's up against. He's probably the story's best and most relatable or compelling character. Hell, he's everything Takemichi is with the ability to scrap with the best of them. It's a damn shame that he was killed off like this at the end. Speaking of the end of things, these two arcs don't present the best stepping stones to the end of the story. Boten is mainly there to convince the audience and Takemichi that Mikey has to be saved for all of us to be satisfied. Three Deities is empty except for the sloppy setup for Takemichi's future vision and Mikey's dark impulse, making him a complete lunatic. Sure, it sets the stage for what's to come and introduces a lot of characters for the big finale, but that's really it. Unfortunately, these two arcs feel like steps back for the story's progress more than they feel like they push it forward. Mikey's actions are rewritten apparently. Takemichi magically gets future sight and Draken can't even surpass his pain naturally. It feels like major changes were made to fit a glove the story wasn't alluding to from the very beginning. Fortunately, that's all I have for today. I'll see you all next time for my coverage of Tokyo Revengers' final story arc and my thoughts on the series as a whole. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time.